Ever find yourself wondering uh, about the reach of Philippine labor laws? Like, can your employer actually penalize you for leaving a job too soon? We're about to dive deep into a fascinating Supreme Court case that tackles this very issue. Buckle up because it involves an employment bond, a sudden resignation, and an unexpected legal showdown.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how a seemingly standard resignation turned into a complex legal battle, raising questions about contract enforcement and the jurisdiction of labor courts. This case really highlights those gray areas where individual rights and corporate interests collide.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's 2011. We have Camille, a network engineer who's just 5 months into her new job at Comscentre Philippines. Things aren't working out as she hoped, and she decides to resign.
And that's where the employment bond clause in her contract comes into play. It stipulated that she had to stay for at least 2 years or pay P 80,000 if she left early.
80,000 pesos. That's a hefty price tag for changing your mind. Did Camille know about this clause when she signed the contract?
Well, the contract was clear about the bond, so presumably she did. But as you can imagine, being reminded of that P 80,000 when she resigned probably didn't sit well. She decided to email the Australian HR manager directly to get some clarification.
Interesting move. You'd think going straight to someone overseas might raise some eyebrows within the company?
It did. Her direct supervisors were not happy about being bypassed. They issued her a show cause letter and even suspended her, citing a breach of company protocol.
Wow, talk about escalating the situation.
Yeah.
So she's resigning, facing a hefty financial penalty, and now she's suspended. What did Camille do next?
She didn't back down. Camille decided to fight back. She filed a lawsuit against Comscentre for illegal suspension and demanded various unpaid benefits, including 13th month pay and leave conversions. Comscentre, of course, countered by insisting she pay the P 80,000 bond.
So it was a standoff that ended up in court. What happened in the initial rulings?
The first round went to Camille. The Labor Arbiter sided with her, finding the suspension unjustified. The arbiter awarded her unpaid wages and damages.
Sounds like a clear victory. Was that the end of it?
Not quite. The case then went to the National Labor Relations Commission, NLRC, the next level in the Philippine labor court system.
For those unfamiliar with the Philippines legal system, the NLRC is like an appeals court, specifically for labor cases, right?
Exactly. And here's where things take a turn. While the NLRC upheld some of Camille's claims, they also allowed Comscentre to deduct that P 80,000 bond from what they owed her.
Wait, really? They could just take the money like that. It seems counterintuitive that they could deduct the bond after the initial ruling.
That's precisely what Camille challenged. She appealed to the Court of Appeals, arguing this employment bond issue was a civil matter and not within the jurisdiction of labor tribunals, and the Court of Appeals actually agreed with her, nullifying the NLRC's deduction.
So did Camille ultimately get to avoid paying the bond?
Not so fast. Comscentre was persistent and took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, now I'm on the edge of my seat. What did the Supreme Court have to say about all of this?
Well, the Supreme Court, in a decision that surprised many, actually reversed the Court of Appeals ruling.
They decided with the company. So even though Camille resigned, she still had to pay the bond because of that clause in her contract.
That's right. The Supreme Court's decision, in a nutshell, stated that even though the company was wrong to suspend Camille, the bond issue was directly tied to her employment contract. This meant it fell under the jurisdiction of labor courts, not civil courts, as Camille had argued.
So this case goes beyond just one resignation. It raises questions about how these employment bond clauses are interpreted and enforced in the Philippines, right?
Absolutely. This decision had a ripple effect and highlighted the complexities of seemingly simple employment situations. And it all stemmed from a network engineer trying to find a better path for her career. This case, officially known as Comscentre Phils, INC, and Patrick Bowe petitioners via Camille B. Rocio, respondent, GR no, 2222212, decided on January 22, 2020, brought to light the crucial role of understanding all the terms in your employment contract.
Yeah, this isn't just about knowing what's in the contract, but also about understanding the legal framework surrounding these situations, isn't it?
Exactly. This case really underscores why it's crucial to consider having a lawyer review your employment contract before you sign it. They can help you identify potentially problematic clauses like this employment bond, and might even be able to negotiate better terms on your behalf.
That's a great point. Prevention is better than cure, as they say. It's much easier to address concerns up front than to find yourself in a legal battle down the road. But let's go back to the Supreme Court's decision for a moment. What were the key arguments that swayed the court in favor of the company?
Well, the Supreme Court emphasized the principle of no split jurisdiction. This means that all issues arising from an employment relationship, including claims and counterclaims, should ideally be resolved within the labor court system. They saw the employment bond as being inextricably linked to the employment contract itself.
So even though Camille raised valid concerns about the company's actions, the court felt that the entire dispute should be handled within the labor court system.
Precisely. The Supreme Court basically said, yes, the company may have been wrong to suspend her, but that doesn't negate the validity of the employment bond, which is a separate issue.
This case really brings to light the nuances of legal jurisdiction. It's not always as straightforward as it seems. But what about the broader implications here? Does this decision set a precedent for similar cases?
It definitely has implications for future cases involving employment bonds in the Philippines. The Supreme Court's decision affirmed that these clauses, when included in an employment contract, are enforceable under Philippine law.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? Should everyone be meticulously scrutinizing their contracts for these minimum employment length clauses and employment bonds?
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your rights and obligations as an employee. Take the time to understand every clause in your contract. If there's something you don't understand, ask for clarification. And as we mentioned earlier, consider seeking legal counsel if you have any doubts or concerns. It's better to be safe than sorry.
I think this case also highlights a potential power imbalance between employers and employees.
That's a valid point. While employers have a legitimate interest in protecting their investments, employees also have the right to pursue their careers without being unfairly penalized.
Exactly. It sparks the question. Are employment bonds a fair and balanced way for companies to protect their investments? Or do they disproportionately restrict employee mobility, potentially stifling career growth and personal development?
That's a great question, and it's one that legal experts and policymakers continue to debate. There are arguments on both sides. Some argue that employment bonds are necessary to deter employees from leaving prematurely, especially after a company has invested in their training and development. Others contend that such clauses create an uneven playing field, making it harder for employees to seek better opportunities or change careers without facing significant financial burdens.
It's certainly a complex issue with no easy answers. But this case provides valuable food for thought for both employers and employees. What are some alternative approaches companies might consider instead of relying solely on employment bonds?
Well, there are several strategies companies could explore. For instance, they could offer more competitive salaries and benefits packages to incentivize employees to stay. They could also focus on creating a positive and supportive work environment where employees feel valued and motivated.
Those sound like more sustainable approaches in the long run, fostering loyalty and engagement rather than relying on financial penalties.
Exactly. Investing in employee well-being and professional development can often be more effective than trying to bind them with contracts.
This deep dive into Camille's case has been incredibly insightful. It's a reminder that employment law can be complex and that seemingly straightforward situations can have unexpected legal consequences.
It also reminds us that the law is constantly evolving, and that it's essential to stay informed about your rights and obligations as both an employer and an employee.
So if you found this case as fascinating as we did, we encourage you to hit that favorite button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever encountered a situation involving an employment bond or faced challenges when resigning from a job? We'd love to hear your perspectives. And of course, if you're enjoying these deep dives into complex and intriguing legal cases, be sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more thought-provoking discussions. We have a whole library of episodes exploring various aspects of the law, from contract disputes to intellectual property rights.
Yeah, we love bringing you these stories and insights, and your support helps us keep doing what we do. But before we wrap up this episode, let's touch upon some key legal doctrines that were at play in Camille's case. Understanding these can provide valuable context for anyone interested in the legal aspects of employment contracts.
Great idea. Let's break it down. First up, we have the doctrine of reasonable causal connection. What exactly does that mean?
In simple terms, it means that any claim for damages, whether it's from the employee or the employer, needs to be directly related to the employment relationship. It can't be something completely unrelated or tangential.
So in Camille's case, the Supreme Court affirmed that the employment bond issue was directly tied to her employment contract. Therefore, fulfilling this reasonable causal connection requirement.
Exactly. The bond was part and parcel of the employment agreement, not some separate or arbitrary penalty.
Another important doctrine at play here is the concept of original and exclusive jurisdiction of labor courts. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, this doctrine means that certain types of disputes, specifically those arising from employment contracts like Camille's, fall under the exclusive purview of labor tribunals. They have the primary authority to hear and decide these cases.
So that's why the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of Comscentre Right, because they determined that the employment bond issue was within the jurisdiction of labor courts, not civil courts, as Camille had argued.
Precisely. The Supreme Court emphasized that labor courts have the expertise and experience to handle these kinds of disputes, which are often nuanced and require a deep understanding of labor laws and employment practices.
And finally, there's the principle of no split jurisdiction, which seems particularly relevant in this case.
Absolutely. This principle aims to prevent conflicting decisions and ensure a more efficient resolution of legal issues. It emphasizes that all aspects of a dispute stemming from the employment relationship, including claims from both the employer and employee, should be handled within the same court system.
So, in essence, the Supreme Court didn't want to split the case between different court systems, even though Camille had some valid points. They wanted the entire dispute handled by the labor courts.
That's a great way to put it. These legal doctrines provide a framework for understanding the Supreme Court's rationale and have significant implications for how similar cases might be handled in the future.
This deep dive into Camille's case has been a fascinating exploration of employment contracts, legal jurisdiction, and the power dynamics between employers and employees. It underscores the importance of being informed, knowing your rights, and seeking expert legal advice when needed.
Well said. It's a reminder that the law can be complex, but understanding its intricacies can empower us to make more informed decisions, both in our professional and personal lives.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive for today. We hope you found this discussion insightful and thought-provoking.
We encourage you to continue exploring these topics, consider the implications for your own professional life, and stay curious about the world around you.
Until next time, keep diving deep.